Thank you for joining us today, especially for those who, who are here for the first time. So we are very excited to have you as part of our growing cybersecurity community. So before we get started, just quick introduce our community. We will organize monthly meetup and invite experts from the cybersecurity domain to share their knowledge and insights. So if there's a particular topics you are interested in, you can let me know. And also if you know someone who are expert in this and can provide us a valuable speech, also please let me know. And we will greatly appreciate your input. So don't forget to follow us in LinkedIn and in YouTube channel. So our online meetup will be partially posted in a recording will be partially posted on the YouTube channel. So yeah, thank you for being here. Let's get started. Yeah, today we have Jeffrey from Macquarie Group. He's a senior architecture, so he will share us some insights from senior architecture view. And congratulations, Jeff has been promoted as associate director. So you must be done something right. So then you can be that success. So yeah, hand over to you, Jeff.
Awesome. All right, guys. My name is Jeffrey Jiang. As Della mentioned, I work at Macquarie Group in security architecture. But before I get started, I just obviously wanted to thank Tim and Della for organizing this event. I think it's extremely valuable that we have a community of people where, we can help each other to sort of improve in our careers. And I think it's really great that we have so many people who are interested in cybersecurity. It's a really, really interesting field. I think it's a field that is growing and evolving very, very rapidly as time goes by. So I think that, anyone who decides to choose cybersecurity as a career, you've definitely made the right choice. So can you guys all see my screen, or do I need to do something different to share? All good?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Alrighty. So a little bit about myself. So I didn't always work in cybersecurity. In fact, I grew up in Australia. I came in when I was 6 years old. And essentially when I went through my high school days, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so the most obvious thing that every Chinese parent wants their kid to do is to either be, a banker or a doctor. So I decided that I wanted to be a banker. And therefore I went and did a degree in my undergraduate at Sydney University in commerce. So when I was doing my commerce degree, I thought it was pretty interesting. But when I started working in commerce, I realized that it was the most boringest thing I could ever do. So I did that torture for around, I don't know how long, maybe around 3 or 4 years. And that's when I decided to just quit altogether and to restart my whole career. Now, I got very, very lucky because it just happened to be that I met some guy at some events. And I asked that guy, his name was Raz, and I said, Raz, do you enjoy your job? Hoping that his answer will be the same as mine, that he hates his job and that it was very, very common across everyone who has a job. But then instead what he told me is that he loved his job and that he wouldn't do any other career aside from being in cybersecurity. So basically when he told me that, I said, all right, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow and you're going to help me sort of teach me all the things that I need to do in order to get into this career. So obviously I didn't quit my job because I realized that I had a mortgage that I had to pay. So I had to keep my job. But then on the side, he basically told me, all the things I needed to learn, the degrees that I needed to get, the experience that I needed to get in order to get to a good position within cybersecurity. So at the time I was still working, I decided to go back to university to get a degree in computer science. Now, computer science was completely different to finance and accounting, but what I will say is that a lot of the fundamentals of learning still remains the same, right? So you have a problem, you break it down into many small pieces, and then from that you'll be able to understand, how to solve a problem or how to code even, right? So I think that for everyone on the call who's considering making a career change or is in the midst of a career change, don't get disheartened, take it slow. And you'll be able to learn all the things that you need to know in order to be in cybersecurity. So whilst I was at university, I also asked my friend, the same guy, Raz, I said, hey, Raz, going to university alone is not enough. because everything that you learn is just theory, right? And we all know through our degrees that it can be very, very different to what the actual job is like when you actually step foot into the industry. So because of that, Raz again helped me again. So he pointed me at a direction of one of his other friends who had a small consulting company called Shield. And it's actually the same company that Tim worked at a couple of years later. We didn't cross paths, but it's good to know that we all sort of started at the same area. So funnily enough, a lot of people might be thinking, well, you don't have any experience. Why would someone hire you, right? And my answer to that is it's all about character and how you present yourself, like the level of sort of integrity that you have in your personality. And what I mean by that is I went for an interview. I didn't even pretend I knew anything. I didn't even pretend that I had prior experience. And I told them, I literally know nothing. Right? I know absolutely nothing. But what I can say is that I will work very, very hard. And if I work very, very hard, I guarantee you that I can solve any problem in your company and I can do any job that you require me to do because I'm willing to bend over backwards, work 7 days a week, maybe not sleep a few nights a week. And I guarantee you within 1 year, I'll be better than anyone in your company. That's what I told him. And then the guy basically said, all right, that's fine. How much money do you want? So I was pretty shocked because I didn't think that that would work. That was the first time of me trying that tactic of just being brutally honest. And I said, look, I just need this amount to pay my mortgage and then I'll eat just bread and butter, for 1 year and just maybe just drink water instead of Coke. So he was happy with that. He gave me a job. And then that first step foot in the door, I think, is the most critical thing because a lot of people will find it hard to get a job, but sometimes you just have to sort of, grovel a little bit and not ask for too much. And then even if the work that you're doing in the beginning is very boring, may not really be that interesting, or you might think that, cybersecurity is not about it. The reason why they give you all the boring work in the beginning is because they want to see whether or not they can trust you, whether or not they can trust you with doing the boring work before they start giving you things that are a little bit more difficult. So that's my advice for anyone trying to break into the industry is just, first of all, try to meet as many people as you can. So I think, for starters, coming to these events, I think is a great opportunity to meet people. And second of all, when you do find an opportunity to maybe talk to someone about getting a job, don't ask for too much, right? Just tell them, exactly where you're at in life, why you're ambitious to be in cybersecurity, and that you're willing to work hard. And I think that alone is very, very refreshing for most hiring managers because a lot of the hiring managers, they go through these interviews and people always give them false promises, right? People always say that they can deliver the world and they end up delivering nothing, right? So if someone comes up to a hiring manager and says, I actually don't know many things, these are the things that I do know, and these are the things that I'm willing to learn, you're actually elevating your chances of getting hired, in my opinion. So in terms of my career, I obviously started at Shield. I worked there for a few years and I realized that, the industry was evolving very quickly. Cloud computing was becoming more and more important in the world of, businesses. So I realized that I wasn't getting enough experience, at the company, which was Shield, because a lot of the things that they focused on was on-premise technologies like Active Directory, managing Linux services and all that sort of stuff. And so I decided, look, I'm going to have to go to another company where I can get more experience in cloud technology. So I did that. I didn't even ask for a pay increase. So I maintained the same level of pay just so that I can get more experience. Because the thing about the IT industry is that it's all about how much knowledge you have and, how willing you are to keep that knowledge up to date so that you become valuable to employers. And one of the things that's really important that I noticed as well in this industry as well is because if it's changing so quickly, right? A lot of the times you'll see the hiring requirements of you need 10 or 20 years of experience. To be honest, that's not true, right? Because cloud computing has only become mature recently, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, right? So it's actually the newcomers into the industry who are willing to dive deep into these new subject matter expertise are the ones who know way more than the people who've been around for 10 years. Because if you also think about it, people who've been around for 10 years might already feel, a degree of complacency. They don't want to learn new things. They just want to take it easy. They want to take their paycheck, raise their families, and, play on the weekends and see movies, right? They don't want to learn more. So the reality is that if you're new to the industry, you've got that competitive advantage in the sense that you've got that hunger to learn new things, to experiment new things, and to actually put it in practice. So I think that that's your competitive advantage that you have to make full use of. And then fast forward a few years, I ended up getting into the security architecture profession. Security architecture is really interesting, and I would say that it's one of those stepping stones, in my opinion, to get a higher role later on. So, for example, if you wanted to be a CISO, or you wanted to be like a general manager of cybersecurity or something like that, I think it's a good way of setting yourself up because it requires a combination of both technical skills, but also your soft skills, right? I think, especially being Chinese as well, right? Like, we didn't really emphasize soft skills when we were growing up because all we did was like, put our heads into our books and then read, study. And no one really told us to emphasize our ability to communicate and to influence and to make friends and to build relationships, deal with conflicts, all these sort of things, we didn't know we had to learn. So I'll talk about it later, but it's also something that, is required as part of security architecture, being able to communicate very, very effectively, to build relationships, and to, sometimes even play politics. That's important as well. And I think that's important for advancing your career. So that was a very, very long introduction, but I'll jump into the meat of the presentation. So what is security architecture, right? So I think when a lot of people hear the word architecture, they think, oh, that sounds pretty sexy. It's like, sounds very cool. It sounds like the pinnacle of something, right? You're designing how everything gets pulled together. But the reality is that, it is all those things. But the thing is, it still uses a framework of thinking that anyone can learn, and that anyone can pick up and go into this profession. I think the hardest thing about security architecture is getting into security architecture, which I'll also talk about a little bit in the subsequent slides. So what is security architecture? In a nutshell, security architecture is helping an organization protect its infrastructure or its IT components. And you do this by designing and helping the business implement those security controls onto those platforms and those components. There is a lot of like frameworks that you can use, like for example, the SABSA framework, but in my opinion, they're all a little bit outdated. So I've come up with my own sort of 5-step sort of process of being in security architecture and what you need to do. So the first step is always trying to understand what the business requirement is. Now, this is the most important step. And the reality is because, a lot of people in a technical profession, they don't care about the business. They just go, show me the code, show me the technical components, and let me like dive my head in and smash my head against the wall so that I can design controls. But how do you know whether or not those controls are actually required, right? Without first understanding what the business requirement is, right? So a business requirement could be you're developing a new banking application, and that banking application makes payments, right? And the business requirement is, we want to make sure that our payments are made as securely as possible. But at the same time, we want to make sure our customers have a seamless experience with our app and that they don't get frustrated, right? So that's the business requirement. Now, that can be translated into the technical requirements. But a lot of the times what we find when we get to security architecture is that the technical requirement doesn't exactly match the business requirement. So we would work very, very closely with the solution architects, all the sort of engineers, principal engineers, in order to make sure that the technical requirement matches the business requirement perfectly. So sometimes what we'll find is that solution architect will come to us and say that, yep, we'll put MFA on every single thing. Every single time someone logs in, there's MFA on absolutely everything. Now, that doesn't meet the business requirement of having a seamless experience for customers, right? Because customers are just going to get annoyed. Every time they want to log in, they have to go through like 3 different steps, and it's not really protecting them, right? But what will be protecting them? So, for example, we would recommend, well, instead of putting MFA on everything, obviously you need to give the customers a choice of whether or not they want to put MFA on everything. But then what we really want to protect is the high value activities, which is the payments. So every time someone makes a payment, that's when you layer on all the security controls, whether it be biometrics, third factor of authentication, all that sort of stuff to ensure that that payments is being made by that user and that it's not just a scam from a scammer. So that's sort of where we get involved in a lot of these discussions around what is actually the business requirement in order to then determine what are the security controls that we need to apply and work with the technical architects in order to pull that together. Now, the third part is around threat modeling, right? So I think security architects are known for threat modeling. So what is threat modeling? Threat modeling is a process in which now, if you have the solution architecture and the business architecture, trying to understand how someone might be able to game that system, might be able to bypass controls, might be able to exploit the system, right? So, I mean, to take a very, very simple example, new architecture will be, we want to release an API, and that API allows us to make a payment, right? So from a security architecture point of view, we would think that, well, one of the threats could be that someone bypasses the UI front end and hits the API directly, passes a few user inputs, and be able to exploit that API, right? So then we go, okay, so how do we protect that? That's when we would sort of design the security controls. And that's where we say, well, you need authentication, you need authorization, you need to make sure that all the connections are encrypted. You need to make sure that there's some form of rate limiting to make sure that the payment system doesn't fall over. And you need to make sure that, people aren't able to exploit vulnerabilities that might be potentially existing on that API. So for example, we might say that, well, we want to add another layer of application security. So for example, an API security tool, because I know Tim's been working on API security tools, or it could be like a web application firewall, aka WAF, that prevents people from injecting values into an API in order to alter the behavior of that API. So that's the sort of stuff that we would do at the design phase in order to make it more sort of robust. Another example that I can come up with will be, so for example, you've got a new cloud platform that you want to put in place. Let's just say your company decided that they wanted to put in place a new GCP platform or a new AWS platform, right? The security architects will basically go in and say that, well, what are all the things that a potential hacker could do? So for example, with AWS, you create AWS accounts, right? If a potential hacker was able to get into one of those AWS accounts, then they probably already have God mode. They can delete your workloads, they can alter your workloads, they can see the contents of your data. There's so many things that they can do, right? And so we will go, well, we need to make sure that access to those accounts are protected as much as we can. So again, we'll talk about authentication, authorization, making sure that users have certain roles, making sure that if you're an admin user, that admin user can't just freely log into the platform, and that we will implement some sort of just-in-time access where only when they need to access the platform will we give them that permission to access that platform. And on top of all of that, because we know that it's our crown jewels, we need to make sure that there is sufficient, say, auditing, monitoring, and logging, where we basically send all those logs out to maybe a security incident event monitoring system, and then basically analyze those logs to make sure that we're not seeing admins log in at like 3 o'clock at night, because that's probably someone who's hacked those access keys and is logging in from like Russia or somewhere else, right? So that's what we do during the designing the controls phase. We really try to look at every single angle and try to determine what kind of control should we put in order to prevent something bad from happening. Now, the final part is risk management, right? So I think a lot of people might be thinking, why is risk management part of this, right? Don't you already have risk managers? One thing I will say is that there is an increasing trend towards the convergence of roles. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure everyone knows what DevOps is, right? DevOps is actually two roles put together into one role these days, right? So before you had the developers and then you had the operations people. Developers would deploy the code, deploy an infrastructure, and the operations people will manage it. DevOps is the combination of both roles, and they get paid a lot of money because they're doing a lot, but then it sort of demonstrates the convergence of roles that's happening within our industry. So security architects these days will deal a lot with risk, right? Because essentially what we're doing is when we identify a vulnerability or a control gap, or the technical team say that, yeah, we're not going to implement that control, we would have to be able to articulate that risk in very, very precise terms, such that we will then convince the business to spend a little bit more money in order to have that control implemented, right? So this is where communication becomes really important, as well as your technical fluency, because you have to describe to the business, if you don't do this control, this could happen. Someone could hack you. You could become, the next big sensation in a bad way on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald that says this company got hacked because they didn't do X, Y, Z. Right. So I think a lot of you would be aware of all the hacks that went on in the past 2 years, like Optus, like Medibank and all those companies, they got hacked because somewhere down the line, someone didn't propose a control, or someone did propose a control and they decided not to do it. So it becomes really, really important for you to articulate that message, and to sort of not fight the resistance, but to be able to influence your business stakeholders as well as your technical stakeholders into investing money in protecting that platform or technical components. So I stress again, soft skills. I think I've done it already a few times in this. I do it only because I myself didn't realize how important it was until only just, a couple of years ago, where, I decided I have to improve the way that I communicate and the way that I persuade people into doing things. And there's a whole mountain of literature that you can read about the art of persuasion. And I really, really encourage everyone, if cybersecurity is your passion on the side, read as much as you can about persuasion and influence, because I guarantee you it will pay dividends later down the line. Cool. So speaking of soft skills, here you see it again, right? So these are the skills required in order for you to be successful in security architecture and also to get into security architecture, right? So the first thing that I'll focus on again is soft skills. So the first point that I have here is relationship building. So what is relationship building, right? Relationship building isn't just going to someone when you need something, right? Relationship building is someone scratches your back, you scratch their back, right? And over time, because you guys were able to help each other, there's a level of trust and respect that's built into that relationship. And I think we, like, as security professionals, as technical professionals, we have to always reach out to other people and to build a community of friends and relationships and colleagues, such that it will make our lives easier. And the reason why it makes your life easier is because no one can do everything by themselves. All right. I might be pretty good at security, but I might be pretty crap at development, right? Tim might be great at development, and I go, hey, Tim, maybe you and I can sort of work together in doing something great for the company or with ourselves, right? So the more relationships you have, the wider your network, the more powerful you become as a person, right? Because you can just tap into this mountain of expertise where everyone can provide their input in order for you to build something massive and meaningful. The next thing is to explain things very, very simply, right? So, oftentimes when I'm in the workplace, there's a lot of people that struggle to communicate things simplistically, right? You don't have to use big words. You just have to describe it to someone as if they're 5 years old, because if a 5 years old person can understand it, that means that you obviously understand the subject matter very, very well. And I think in security architecture, this is really, really important, because a lot of the times we're explaining technical concepts to the business, right? So the business is always like, they have no idea what security is. Like, what's an API? They have no clue, all right? What is just-in-time access? They have no clue. What's an Active Directory? They have no idea. So you got to explain it to them in a way that is so simple that if you're explaining it to your, 3-year-old brother or like nephew or whoever, that they will be able to understand it as well. The next thing is dealing with conflict, right? So in security architecture, there's a lot of conflicts because there's a natural resistance of the business and technical teams to do what the security guys say. Because when you think about security, it's overhead to them, right? It's not improving the functionality. It's basically saying that we've got to spend more money, more time and effort in order to implement this security control. So they'll often push back, right? So in those sort of situations, we really have to learn how to be diplomatic. Like, how do we deal with someone who's being aggressive towards us? What are the behaviors that we have to sort of exert in order to sort of calm down that situation so that we can respectfully communicate across our points, and for the party opposite of us to also understand why we're recommending certain things, right? So what a lot of people like to do when there's conflict is that they escalate. They tell their managers tell their manager. When you do that, that person who you are dealing with is never going to respect you after that. So even though it's the right thing to do, it's always best for you to understand, how do I deal with this situation so that we're giving both sides face, so no one's losing face. I think that's important, right? And I think we learned that, that's a very Chinese concept as well, right? Like making sure that no one's losing face. And we have to apply these sort of techniques in the workplace in order to deal with conflicts. And that sort of obviously relates to understanding perspectives. So I think one of the techniques that personally I do is that when there is conflict, instead of me telling that person what my ideas are and why my ideas are better than his or her ideas, I told that person, I can understand the reasons why they're making their points because of X, Y, Z, and that does make sense. But on the balance of factors, when you add in, the security perspective, we do think that there are more reasons to implement this security control than not. So when you do that, right, people feel heard because what you often see is people just shouting at each other, right? It's like there's no message like being heard, right? So it's really important to basically understand perspectives. Now, I think the technical skills part is obviously the part that most people are probably more interested in. With security architecture, obviously you get thrown at every single problem, right? So there is an expectation is that you have broad knowledge across multiple IT domains like network security, identity access management, DevSecOps, application security, DLP. There's so many there's so many areas that you have to be across in order to be effective in the field, right? And to be honest, because of such a broad coverage, it's very rare that you'll find a lot of security architects that know everything. So I think in the absence of knowing everything, you just need to have the ability to learn very, very quickly whenever you're confronted with a new IT domain and to sort of dive as deep as you can in order to be able to speak about it intelligibly, right? These days, I think it's a lot easier compared to, say, 5 years ago. For obvious reasons, you've got ChatGPT now, right? Why do you need anything else? Anything you don't understand, if you know how to ask the right question, you'll be able to just type it in, and then ChatGPT will basically tell you, what you need to do in order to make something happen, or what to sort of clarify your understanding of areas where you have doubts on. And I think it's a very, very valuable tool. And if you're not using it, I would suggest that you use it, right? Because if something normally takes you 10 hours to learn, using one of these large language models, you'll be able to learn it within, like 1 hour sometimes, right? So I think it's a very valuable tool. I know a lot of people see it as cheating or something like that, but the reality is that in a world where information is available everywhere, the person who wins is the person who can synthesize that information as quickly as possible and be able to derive value from that information. So make use of all the tools around you. And the point around diving deep into an IT domain, like IT is not that hard. It's like a set of rules that basically creates like an outcome, right? So when you dive deep into IT domain, typically what I do is if it's a new product, like a new API gateway or something like that, the great thing about cloud technologies is that you can actually get that service as a cloud service and only pay a little bit of money in order to learn it. So for example, it could be Apigee as an API gateway. I think Tim could attest to this as well. The moment that you set up your lab, you create a few proxy endpoints, you send a bit of traffic to it, you'll be able to understand with a level of intimacy that most people wouldn't be able to. So hands-on as an architect is something that I really promote, because if you can't build it yourself, you don't really know it, all right? It's like building a house. If you have no idea how to lay a brick, or how like a steel beam works, or how the weight is distributed across the sort of the skeleton of the house, then how do you expect to protect that house, right? So hands-on experience, engineering experience is something that I would always advocate for. So this gets into basically how do you actually get a job in security architecture, right? So there's a lot of paths into security architecture. Basically what you'll see over here is I've got engineering and testing and compliance, audit, and risk. It's a little bit controversial, but I've got this arrow over here to also indicate the strength of how easy is it for you to get into security architecture, and then for you to be good in security architecture, right? So engineering, like I said, hands-on knowledge, there is no substitute for it, right? You have to know how to build something in order to know how to protect it as well, right? So the pros of being in engineering first, and when I say engineering, it doesn't even have to be security engineering. You could just be, a DevOps person, right? Or you could be maybe a developer. Because the thing is, in DevOps and development, you have to have a very strong fundamental understanding of IT in order to be good in those fields, right? So remember before in the previous slide, we talked about all those IT domains. If you're in one of those engineering fields, inevitably you'll be touching one of those domains throughout your career. So for example, if I'm an application developer, I just built and released a new app, but then I realized, oh, how come the traffic is not getting to it, right? then I would have to do a bit of troubleshooting from a network's point of view to understand, oh, I've got a proxy there and that proxy hasn't been configured properly in order to send traffic to my application. And so that's how I would know a little bit more about network security and how that sort of interacts with, say, just generic security. And there's other things as well, such as identity access management, secrets management. As an application developer, you would get those secrets from, say, for example, a secrets vault, and you'll do that in a way that's automated so that someone doesn't have to manually put that secret in, right? So that's the whole premise of secrets management, is how do you automate the process of secrets management so that people aren't manually handling secrets. So this is what I mean. If you're in engineering, whether you're application developer or DevOps, or even someone that manages like Linux hosts, right? You'll be able to sort of pick up new things very, very quickly because you've got a very strong sort of domain understanding of how IT works. But the cons of studying engineering, I would say, is that, I do meet a lot of people who don't prioritize being able to communicate very effectively. You've got a lot of different sort of personality types in engineering. I think a lot of them are introverts. They don't like getting out. They don't like talking to people, which means that even if they're the smartest person in the world, you will never know, right? So if you're an engineer going into security architecture, I think it's really important for you to come out of your shell a little bit and be able to express yourself and to be able to sort of build those relationships. Another con, not really a big con, but obviously anyone not studying security won't really think about threat vectors. So what are the ways in which you can sort of threat model a new platform component or application components? They may not be great at that, but I think it's something that can be easily taught, right? Because like I said, if you learn how to build a building, then you'll know how to protect it, right? Pen testing, I think this is also another really popular area. So penetration testing, they're obviously very, very good at understanding threat vectors, depending on what kind of pen tester you are. There's some pen testers, they're part of a red team, and then they go into organization and they try to hack everything. Those guys are normally pretty good, right? Because they've got a way of thinking which allows them to sort of navigate across an organization and find its weak spots. But then there's also other pen testers who maybe just focus on repetitive pen testing with Burp Suite or one of those tools. And then they sort of become more sort of process driven. So sometimes they may not be the best. But then if you are a pen tester, I think it's really important to have that self-awareness and to get the experience that you need in order to sort of, if you do have ambitions of getting into security architecture, to be able to develop those areas that are required for security architecture. Another pro of pen testing is that you have very strong technical depth because you understand how APIs work, you understand systems, you understand networks. So it's also a really, really great place to start. But some of the disadvantages of studying pen testing is that you're never really building anything in pen testing, right? You're just trying to poke holes at things. So if you never really build anything, you don't really understand intimately maybe where some of those vulnerabilities might lie, where some of those cracks in the structure might exist, right? Because they're just sort of using maybe Metasploit or some of those tools to automate their pen testing to identify vulnerabilities. They're not really thinking about what are the controls that I can layer onto a system in order to make it more robust. So that's one of the sort of disadvantages. And I think also the other one is that from a communications point of view, they can also be lacking sometimes. But again, it just takes a bit of self-awareness for you to basically go and realize that, oh, I'm not great at communicating. Maybe I should, talk to more people, maybe do a few talks, to sort of improve that aspect of your sort of soft skills. Now, the final one is compliance, audit, and risk. Like, we've got a lot of people in our profession from compliance, audit, and risk instead of engineering and pen testing. And that comes to me as a big surprise because, when people are in compliance and audit, I think they've got a very, very strong understanding of risk frameworks like NIST, ISO, PCI, DSS, RAP certifications. There's so many things, right? But then when you sort of talk to them about the technical depth of things, that's when they fall over a little bit because they don't understand exactly how things are put together. So imagine in the example that I gave previously, where you have to communicate to your business stakeholders why they need to spend another $1 million in order to implement this new control. This is when they struggle. They just go, oh, because this standard says so. So you're telling me an executive will spend another $1 million because a piece of paper written in 2018 in a PDF version, they have one line that says, oh, do this, right? An executive isn't going to buy that. You need to be able to tap into people's emotions of, telling the executive, if this happens, this could break. You could be on the front page of the news. You could be in a royal commission trying to explain, why, this company doesn't have good controls, right? So you got to be able to tap into people's sort of understanding, sort of explain it to them as if they're 5 years old, so they understand exactly what the root of that issue is. So obviously the cons of studying compliance, audit, and risk is that, you don't have that much technical depth, may not understand the threat vectors. This is actually a pro. They're usually good communicators because they do really well in interviews. They can talk very, very well. And a lot of the security architecture interviews that I've seen so far don't go into a lot of technical detail. Macquarie Group does, like it goes very technical, but then some of the other interviews that I've done in the past, like CBA, Westpac, it doesn't really get too hard. I think they really just look at your prior experience. So maybe, if you get your foot in the door and get into security architecture, you'll be able to go around if you're in compliance and audit. But then the reality is that, unless you sort of dive deeper into the engineering aspects, you will never become like very, very good as a security architect. And this is just my opinion. I think people in compliance audit and risk might disagree with me, but I think that, you do need a level of technical depth in order to be good in security architecture. And just to reiterate, this is why I've drawn this arrow over here for strength, just to demonstrate that, engineering is the strongest, pen test second, compliance and audit and risk is the third. Alrighty. So I think this is the slide that a lot of people are really interested about as well, right? Because why do you have a job? To get money, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't even be working. I'd be just, on a beach somewhere, just lying down and not thinking about anything for the rest of my life. So I think security architecture salaries are pretty good, all right? I think on average, if you just look at Glassdoor, right, you don't even have to ask me. You look at Glassdoor and you type in security architecture salaries, you'll see that it ranges anywhere between, say, 140 to like 250, right? $1,000. And I think, if you're a contractor, the day rates are normally around $1,200 a day. So the money is really good in security architecture. But what I will say is that, money alone shouldn't be the main motivator, because if it is, and you're doing a boring security architecture job, you're just going to go a little bit crazy in your head, right? Like you need it to be interesting. You need it to be reinvigorating so that you have, every morning you wake up at 7:30, happy to go to work to face new challenges and be good at your job. So naturally, if you're good at your job, they'll give you more money. Now, these are the challenges, all right? So security architecture has a few challenges, and some people may not admit it, but in my opinion, I think that it can be quite existential to the security architecture profession. All right. And what I mean by that is, I don't know whether or not security architecture is going to be around in the next 10 years or so. Right. And the first reason for this is there's an increased trend of platformization and consolidation. And what I mean by that is, previously back in the days, you had people with all these many disparate applications all doing their own things, right? So security architects will be in very high demand because they get just pulled to each project and then they provide security architecture advice. So it's never ending work. But then from a business point of view, obviously that is not ideal, because you've got so much scatter and sprawl across your environment that you're wasting a lot of money spending time on each different application. So there is now a trend of consolidation when people try to pull everything onto the same platform. Which means that from a security architecture point of view, you will have less work. You only need to secure a platform once, and then that's it, right? After that, you may not have work. You might have to go to another company, right? So there is that sort of inherent risk. The other one is around the trend of no ops or serverless. I don't know if people on this call are familiar with these terms, but essentially back in the days, you had people managing, Linux services, the networks, and going all the way up the stack to the application. These days, it's not like that anymore with cloud services, right? So if you're aware on cloud, you can just have a function as a service where you just put in a bit of code and the function just runs your code. There's no need to manage the underlying compute or anything like that, because it's all being managed by the cloud service provider, right? So in those sort of environments, again, if you're sort of canceling out all the things that are as part of, say, the OSI stack, it means security architecture only really need to focus on just the application level. So you're basically reducing the scope of our work to just that one layer at the top. So in the future, when we go to no ops, or where, say, for example, there is no applications where people are not coding anymore and people are just getting, say, large language models to generate the application for them, then you would argue, well, then why do you need security architecture, right? Everything is already being managed by the SaaS service provider, that, maybe security architecture will become a redundant profession. And that could occur, right? And the last part is around artificial intelligence, right? So like I said before, we're advisors to the business. We tell them what controls you need. But when you've got artificial intelligence and you've got this new platform that's just been built, if I'm a technical architect, I'm the business, I just feed that into the AI, and the AI will tell me all the controls that I need. Now, it's not that great these days. It's not that mature, but then I think developments in this space is happening very, very quickly, such that in the future, I do think that artificial intelligence will be something that can replace the job of a security architect. Where it might be a little bit lacking, and could be our saving grace as a security architect, is the fact that you still need someone to communicate those topics, right? But then I don't know about you guys, but with the new ChatGPT on our, say the voice, the one where you can talk to it and it can reply to you, that's pretty scary as well, because it seems as if I'm talking to a real human being. And if I just tell ChatGPT, say it in a way as if I'm like 10 years old and it's able to do that, then again, I think that's a risk for the security architecture profession, because maybe you don't need people anymore into the future. Cool. That's it from me. I'll pass it back to Adela and Tim for any questions, and also to the rest of the guys on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Fantastic one. So I have some questions for you. So during that, anyone who wants to ask question, you can post in channel. So we will answer that later. So my first question is, could you please describe me your daily work? Like, Tim mentioned that you have a lot of meeting, need to do a lot of documentation, this kind of thing. So can you describe your daily?
Yeah. So the daily life of a security architect is you often have multiple projects happening all at the same time. And a lot of times they're large strategic projects, right? And essentially what we do is we try to get involved at a very, very early stage where we can help define the requirements for the whole project alongside the other architects, right? Because you've got the solution architects and you've got the security architects. So a lot of it is, having calls to understand what are we trying to achieve, what are the potential risks, how do we lay on these controls, such that we can sort of protect that solution. So I spend a lot of my time trying to influence people. What do we need to do in order to make a solution secure? So once we have, say, for example, a design finalized, essentially what we do is we go through that security architecture process where you do your threat modeling, you define the controls that you need in order to secure that platform. And that's the documentation that Tim mentioned, where you basically have to write out all these sort of things and then go through them with the project team in order to make sure that they can actually implement all those controls. And if they can't, that's when we go through that risk process where we go, well, the team said that they're not doing this. And for example, we will raise a risk on that and have conversations with either the business or the executives to say that, team can't do this. This is probably going to be a blocker. We need to sort of come to a middle ground so that we can get the risk to a level that is within the risk appetite of the business. So that's sort of like a day in the life of a security architect. But sometimes it varies a lot as well. Like it could be we get involved in other sort of working groups where we want to improve our secrets management process, or we want to improve our identity access management process. There's a whole lot of things that we sort of get involved in as security architects.
Okay, great. So my second question is like, what kind of people can be architecture? So like Tim, he said he cannot be that person because he hating, typing the document, this kind of thing. He focus on to solve the real solve the real issues, more hands-on and technical things. And for architecture, it's more like assessment or management, communication, this kind of thing. So I think although they are all cybersecurity, for me, they are different. They are totally different. One is really technical, another is not. But so for lots of beginners, how to make decision which career path they should follow?
I think it really depends on your personality, right? if your personality is the type where you like to get into the details of things and to be hands-on, then obviously you need to choose that career where you can become like a staff engineer, or one of those professions for life, right? Because that gives you the satisfaction. If you're that type of personality, like for example, me, I would say that even though I'm okay with the engineering stuff, I think personally I enjoy having discussions about the overall enterprise architecture and the direction in which the company needs to go from an architecture point of view. I think I would be more suited for that, right? So it really depends on like what floats your boat. You know, if you're going to work and you feel happy every day, that's what floats your boat. But yeah, people really need to sort of look deep down inside into their own personality, and to make that determination.
Yeah, also for the career path, they have a lot of different domain, like cybersecurity can be the cloud security, can be the infrastructure security, application security. So it's quite different, right?
Yeah.
So say for example, a nurse, she wants to be a architecture, then it's, they still have a lot of steps need to move.
That's right.
Like they need to get started with system admin, or they want to be the cloud engineers, and they can move to achieve that goal. So what kind of role you think you can move to architecture?
Yeah, so I think like I said, I started my career in finance and accounting.
Oh,
So I think I know if a friend of mine, he started his career as a dentist,
oh,
right? So it's very broad. It just really depends on whether or not you can learn, right? Everything can be learned. It's like when you first went to school and they make you study mathematics, English, Chinese, law, whatever, right? As long as you can pick up a book and that book explains to you what something is, you'll be able to learn it, right? So whether or not you'll be good at it really depends on, I think, also your personality, your willingness to work hard, and also what your learning capability is and how quickly you can learn. But like in my honest opinion, anyone can do it. It's just a matter of putting in the time and effort, and also it takes a bit of luck. Like what I said in the beginning, I didn't get into this profession just by myself, right? I had someone that I could talk to who can open a few doors for me to get my first job. And I think that's important as well, to be able to sort of get to know as many people in the industry as possible so that you're increasing the surface area of your luck.
yeah. Also, you mentioned luck. Well, I think this is different mindset, because I can say you are more ABC. We are more Chinese mindset. So when we have a coffee catch up or the networking, so what's the strategy to begin with? Because somehow we make people feel confused or offended. So how we start with the topic?
Yeah, I think it's not really the topic, right? I think every interaction that you have, it's more about how can you add value to another person's life, It could just be that, for example, you go to a networking event, it's just showing interest in other people, instead of talking about yourself. And if you show interest about other people and you think other people are interesting, then you will never run out of topics, right? You just continue asking them about, how they got into the profession. What do they think is the hardest thing about their profession? There's an endless amount of things that you can talk about when you're interested in other people. I think that's the strategy. And I think, even though I am ABC, I do think that there is still a barrier for me, right? Because in corporate Australia, there's a lot of like white people, and white people essentially, they like to hang out together sometimes. And if you're coming in, they see that you look different, they might not want to talk to you, right? And I feel that way, and I think a lot of my colleagues who are also similar to me feel that way as well. But then it could just be a limitation that you put on yourself that, oh, I'm not from here, so therefore it's harder for me. They don't want to talk to me because I'm not from here, right? But then the moment that you lift that sort of that thought that, oh, I'm different to people, and you just approach them and just start talking, people will sort of get to know you as a person as well. Because if you limit yourself, you never get that opportunity, right? So the moment that you let go of those barriers, of that inhibition, you'll be able to sort of network a lot better.
Okay, so last question from my side. So according to your observation, cybersecurity have a broad future, but which domain you think it's more easier to get started with? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think, that's a really good question. I guess studying cloud security.
Mm.
There's a few reasons for it, right? The first reason is that, cloud platforms are there for you to experiment and to learn very, very quickly. There's a lot of certifications that you can take to actually understand what's happening. And you can sort of run your own business. If you have an idea like a startup, you can go spin up, a few cloud instances in order to have an application of your own and use that as a portfolio to then get a job. So cloud security, I think, is well, cloud engineering, not just security, is definitely the place to go. Like network security, all that sort of stuff, in my opinion, is a bit dead. Because as people move onto the cloud, less and less do they actually use like a real firewall, like a Palo Alto firewall, Fortinet firewall. It's not happening as much, especially for some of the newer companies.
Okay, great. So before we answer the question in channel, Tim, do you have anything?
No, I'm all fine. Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
No worries.
So yeah, the first one, it's asking for the certification. So SABSA.
SABSA, yeah.
Yeah. Still.
Well, sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, you can read that in the channel. So it's asking SABSA certification is outdated or still was it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. SABSA is an academic framework that tells you what the approach might be in doing security architecture, right? But I do think that the framework is outdated in the sense that, a lot of companies take it literally and then they take the whole SABSA framework and they go through, the conceptual, the logical, the physical, and all that sort of stuff. And it's a big waste of time. The reality is that instead of doing that whole exercise, there's to be honest, there's not that many controls that you would actually implement in order to secure something, right? So if you have a baseline of controls for every single application, let's say authentication and cryptography, controls relating to availability, then you'll be able to cover 90% of the controls that are being proposed by SABSA anyways. So there is like a whole shift in the industry that I feel right now to move a little bit away from SABSA and to find ways in which you can sort of just bake a baseline of controls into different applications such that you don't have to go through that whole process. Hope that answers the question. The next question is, could you remind me the meaning of the strength vector when you talked about engineers? Oh, okay, yeah. So the strength vector is basically what I'm saying that if you start at engineering, you will have the best chance of getting into security architecture and being good at security architecture, right? Let me try to go back. So when you're studying pen testing, I'm saying that, yep, it's good, but then it's not as strong as if you started in engineering. And then when you have the third part, which is around risk, audit, and compliance, in my opinion, that's the least strong sort of profession to get into security architecture and to actually be good at the job. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Jeff. That's very clear.
Awesome, thanks, mate. There's quite a few questions. Okay, so the next one is, three. When you are hiring new team members, do you have a preference of these three backgrounds? Yep. So for me, my preference is they have an engineering background, because otherwise they just all talk, right? And I think that can be a little bit dangerous, especially when people start pretending to know what they're saying. And I've seen that a lot in security architecture, and I think that it doesn't really lead to good outcomes, right? So I always have a preference for engineers who want to make the transition into something that is more sort of, like as Tim would describe it, more management, where you sort of go into meetings and you try to convince people and try to sort of decide the direction of the organization. I think that, yep, it's best to start from engineering because you have a very solid base, and then you can move from there. Cool. Which cloud platform hands-on experience is most demanding for security architects? Kelvin, could you elaborate on that question a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. I think I just want to ask, like AWS, GCP, or Azure, which platform is most demanding to for security architect to be in doing the job?
Yep.
For example,
Gotcha.
if I want to be security architect, which platform enhancements is most important to get, like, yeah.
To get a job, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's also a really good question. It depends on the demand, right? And it depends on the data around how companies are adopting the various cloud platforms, right? So in the very, very beginning, AWS, obviously, right? Because AWS was the most mature platform. And then what you see now, even though AWS takes up a lot of the market space, what you see is that from a adoption point of view, GCP and Azure are coming up very, very fast. So I would say Azure second, GCP third. But then just because market share shows that AWS is the highest, Azure is second, and GCP is the third, doesn't mean that you should not be focusing on GCP and Azure, because those cloud service providers have a huge adoption rate. And there is more companies that have a lack of skill sets for actually implementing GCP and Azure. So you got to target areas where there is a high demand, but a lack of supply. And I would say that Azure and GCP is probably the best area. Azure is probably the safest one because a lot of companies move to Azure, like governments, as an example, because it's a lot easier to migrate your Azure AD, not migrate, but to sort of connect up your Azure AD so that you can have your existing sort of identity system in the cloud. Whereas AWS doesn't really have that. But from a GCP point of view, a lot of big companies that have very big data requirements, especially in the world of AI, GCP shines there. So if you want to be a little bit more risky, I would say do GCP. But if you want to be safe, I would say do Azure.
Thank you.
No worries. Another question is about the challenges. I agree with your argument. I think in the future, many services will be centralized and outsourced to big companies. What would be your suggestion for the beginners such that they can reduce the impact of these potential challenges? Yeah. So that's a really good question. I think there is no substitute to being good technically, right? As an engineer. So for example, if there is a new service that's come out, like for example, learning how to build like a LLM model and get it to sort of learn from your data such that you can create your own model. These sort of things become really important. So what I see happening a lot is a lot of companies, they go, I want to build an LLM model, right? So as a security architect or maybe an engineer, you will need to know how to do that, right? From an engineer's point of view, you will need to know how to build it and how to leverage these various SDKs that these various platforms provide. And from a security architect's point of view, you need to be sort of abreast of the new sort of attack and the threats that sort of exist for, say, the new AI models and being able to threat model those. But I think, let's just say that security architecture does disappear in the future. What's really important is that you can sort of fall back onto what you did before you went into security architecture. So that could be, for example, just engineering, could be DevOps, it could be pen testing, because I think those professions will probably last a little bit longer than security architecture. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
No worries. Have you considered working in other countries such as Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, where you might find even better pay opportunities? Yeah, absolutely. I thought about Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, but I think it really depends on your quality of life as well and what's important to you, right? So for me, I think what's important is that my parents are here as well. Maybe in a few years I'll have a few babies. I need to give those babies to my parents to help me look after sometimes. So that's important, right? So I think as long as you can get by in Australia with the pay that you have over here, then I think, in my opinion, it's good enough for me. Cool. Thanks for sharing. You said you enjoyed the discussion on overall security posture of the company, but before you become a security architect, how did you get the chance to experience? You say enjoy the discussion on overall security posture, but before you became security, how did you get the chance? I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume you're asking, how did I get the chance for becoming, for getting into IT or becoming a security architect?
Maybe how you shift to architecture. So
okay, how I shift to architecture.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I applied. right? I didn't sort of leverage my network or anything. But on LinkedIn, you have a lot of jobs that come up, and I just apply. I think there are an increasing amount of managers that expect to see that someone has good engineering backgrounds. So the first job that I had in security architecture was actually at Commonwealth Bank. And I think the manager just wanted people who are very, very good technically, and who had a proven track record of implementing various engineering projects in the past. So at the time, I was in cloud engineering. So yeah, I did a lot of work like migrations, deployments, landing zone serverless. Like there's so many things that I did. So I was able to talk about that, and I think that just impressed the guy, and that gave me the opportunity to get in. So I think just apply for the role. As long as you're very strong technically and that comes across in the resume, I think you will get an interview. Like certainly if it was Macquarie Group and we saw a resume where people said that, they had implemented a whole cloud environment for various companies or like did many, many migrations, I would definitely interview them, right? Because in order to be successful in those projects, you have to have half a brain. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Oh, actually, I want to ask that you said you enjoyed talking about the security posture, which is the usually the big picture of the company.
Yep.
In simple words, I just would like to know how did you find that interest even before you become a security architect? Because
okay.
for example, I don't get a chance to talk about that if I'm not management.
Yeah, I think it's through osmosis. So what I mean by osmosis is, so I started off in a few very small companies, right? And in those small companies, they talked about a lot of things, and management would be very close to just the engineers as well, right? So management will often say that, look, there's now a trend towards, say, moving to the cloud environment. We need to sort of understand this a little bit better, right? So it's all about sort of being around those people who talk about those topics, and for you to be able to provide input to those topics, that will then make you realize, I think I can sort of think in a way that is more expansive in nature, and I can sort of consider, the sort of the characteristics and attributes of the whole organization in order to determine where we want to take this organization. So just to sort of give you an example, like maybe just a very, very simple example, right? Let's just say that you and your friends wanted to build a startup, right? And then you've got a lot of decisions to make around what kind of tools you want to implement. So maybe one of your friends said, let's deploy everything on Kubernetes and make it very, very similar to how the big banks do it, right? But then you go, but we're still a startup. We're not really generating any money at the moment. If we go down the Kubernetes route, it means that we're going to be spending more money, but then we're going to be foolproofing our architecture for the future. So that's the pro. But then the con is that you're going to be spending a lot of money. So then you might then decide, all right, instead of doing that, I'll just deploy my code on like a simple EC2 instance and expose it on a gateway, right? It gets the job done. You get a few customers, and then you sort of invest in the better sort of architecture in the future. So these are the sort of things that you would think about when it comes to, like architecture in general, and the thinking that's required in order to decide, what are you going to do that's going to be best for the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a very good example. Yeah, I'll try to find some like maybe small companies with very friendly management who wants to talk with me about it. That's very important.
Small companies are the best to start. I didn't mention in this, but when you join a small company, the hierarchy is very, very flat. Everyone's role is important in a small company, right? If you join a big company, you're just going to be doing one thing for the next 3 years, right? So at a small company, you could potentially learn 30 times more than someone who decided to join a big company. And I think that's been my experience, and also a lot of my colleagues as well who start off in a small company. You grow very, very fast.
Yes, and I also heard from my friend that it's easier to get in smaller companies when you don't have PR.
Exactly, yeah. It definitely is, yeah. Smaller companies, because they just need the talent, right? So if you're good at your job, they'll take you in. So yeah, definitely target those. I'm not exactly sure how to find them. I don't know whether or not they advertise a lot on LinkedIn. But yeah, if I do find out, I'll definitely share.
Okay.
Okay.
due to the time, so maybe Jeff, you can pick up a 1 or 2 questions from the channel.
All right, let me see. Where was I just then? Just to be fair, maybe I'll just continue down this line.
Yeah, because we wish our online meetup can cover more general questions, not like personal questions, you know.
Okay, so hi, can I know what is the best role for my next step on it? Support engineering around 1 year's experience. Is it possible to go to cloud roles? Yeah, definitely. Like it really depends on what kind of support engineering you're doing. So maybe Lee, could you give me a few examples of what you mean?
Hi, my IT support is more on networking and hardware.
Okay. And what kind of work do you do in that space? Like troubleshooting, like implementing firewalls, like that sort of stuff?
More on network configuration.
Network configuration, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it is PC stuff, printer lah.
Okay. So I think, yeah, you definitely need to, I think, do maybe a bit of self-study on the side. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of cloud certifications that you can do. So, you know, if you're doing a lot of stuff that's on-premise, chances are you've touched a lot of Microsoft products, I assume, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So maybe start with Microsoft Azure and do a few certifications there, know how that cloud environment works, and maybe try to replicate some of the things that you do in your job as a support engineer, but in the cloud, but then manage the whole thing. So it could just be a lab environment that you sort of work on. And then from that, you'll use that alongside your experience as a support engineer to apply for other roles like cloud engineer. And the thing is, my advice is go for small consulting companies because if you have these certifications, they use your certification to sell you to customers, right? So the more certifications you have as a junior, I think the better, because then, you know, these companies will want you because your resume looks good and it looks good when they pass it over to potential clients.
Okay, thank you.
Felix, could you let me know how long it typically takes to achieve that role, particularly in the cloud domain? Additionally, what certifications would you recommend starting with, and what would be the best way to develop my soft skills? Are there any books that you will suggest? Okay, so big question. I've got a very short memory as well. Could you let me know how long it takes to achieve that role? So I think to achieve a role of a security architect, I think that's what you mean, Felix, right?
Not exactly, but I've just finished my Azure and Microsoft AZ500, SC 100 and 400.
Yep.
So I'm aiming for it, but I don't know how long it's going to take. And just FYI, I'm also in Whipple as well. So we're pretty college as well.
Yeah.
So the managers asked me to become one, but I'm not 100% sure at the moment.
So the managers want you to work in the cloud domain, like a cloud engineer. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think, to be honest, I don't think it takes long, right? So you've already got that opportunity to move in. I think you take it, right?
Right.
And especially if you've already taken the initiative to do AZ500, that's the architect, right? The professional architect role.
That's a security architect associate.
Security architecture associate. Okay. Yeah. I think it's also important that you do not just the security ones, but do some of the normal architecture ones like Azure engineering. I forgot what they call it these days, because then that will give you the bigger picture. Because the problem with the security certifications in cloud is that I find that they focus a little bit too much on like, you know, the very security products, the very security products of say Azure, instead of like, how do you set up like a Azure virtual network as an example, right? I think those things are probably more important in the beginning.
Right. Thank you. What about the book? Is there any book you can recommend it? Because I think it's stuff to at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of books. Let me just check my Kindle. Give me a second. I think the first one that comes to mind is a book called, it's literally just called Persuasion. And it basically teaches you what are the things that you need to know to persuade people, right? So the first principle that they talk about is reciprocity. So reciprocity is, you know, I help you with something. You're more likely to help me with something because I've already helped you with something, right? And apparently the human brain is configured in a way such that if another human being does something for you, you feel inclined to do something back for them. So a really good example would be when you go on holidays and you go to a different country and you go into the tourist area, you'll find that there's these people that come over and just give you things, right? They give you things not because they want to give it to you for free. They give you something and right after that, they ask you for a donation. And the reason why they do that is because now you feel bad because you've already taken that thing from them such that you're like, oh, let me just grab into my pocket and give you $5. All right. So it teaches, like, these are just tricks, right? But I think knowing the tricks is important, but deep down inside, I think from a soft skills point of view, you just have to nurture a sense of really wanting to, be interested in other people, to connect with other people, right? Because every human being, I think everyone in this course is probably older than 20 years old, right? Every human being's been through a lot and we've all got like one or two stories that's really interesting. So it's really about trying to find out what those one or two stories are. And then that person will talk to you for the next 5 hours.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great.
Cool.
Yeah, so when we say engineer, I think it's not only for the computing, right? It's not a software engineer. It's more like...
Oh, it could be network engineering. It could be implementing a new sort of, I don't know, it could be like implementing a new firewall. Like any type of engineering, I think is good in the IT domain.
Yeah, cool. Thanks,
Cool.
Jeff.
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate your time. Yeah, thank you.
That's all good. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, see you next time.
See you next time. See you guys.
Yeah, yes, bye.